All right, welcome back to Fundamentals of Philosophy. This is part 2 of Module 3 on Epistemology, or the study of knowledge. We ended part 1 stranded in the ghostly hallways of the Cartesian theater. The rationalism of Descartes had secured the mind away from the clockwork of the world by imprisoning it within a private inner realm. The empiricism of Locke had provided us with the tools to project a representation of the external world upon the inner screen of the Cartesian mind, and once these moves had been taken, Bishop Berkeley demonstrated how they reduced the entire concept of an external world into absurdity. But Locke doesn't leave us completely empty-handed. There is a dynamic, forceful causal glue that holds our representations of the world together. We can trust in the inductive scientific reasoning that tells us that events that have always followed one another in the past will continue to follow one another in the future. Even if we can't see past the screen of the theater, we can predict with good assurance what will happen next in the film. This lecture is about how a Scotsman named David Hume destroyed that certainty. And like Berkeley, Hume achieves this by simply using the tools that Locke hands him. All knowledge, Locke tells us, comes from experience. Hume agrees, but he applies this principle far more ruthlessly and consistently than Locke ever did. What Hume brings to the table is a fork. It's called Hume's fork. The fork has 2 points. On the first point, we have what Hume calls relations of ideas. These are ideas that we can't deny without falling into a contradiction, like mathematical proofs or logical tautologies. On the second point, we have what he calls matters of fact. These are either immediate, vivid impressions that are forced upon us by experience, or they're ideas that we've recalled as fainter copies of these impressions later on. Relations of ideas are certain, but they give us no new information about the world. Matters of fact give us new information about the world. They amplify our knowledge, but they lack deductive certainty. That's the trade-off. And together, relations of ideas and matters of fact exhaust everything that we can meaningfully say about the world. Pick up any book, Hume tells us in a famous quote. Does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? Should be a relation of ideas. No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? No. Commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. And with fork in hand, Hume carves the causal glue from Locke's universe. Consider 2 billiard balls or pool balls. One ball strikes another, and the second ball moves, right? But what direct impressions are provided by experience when this happened? What do we actually observe? You have an impression of the first ball approaching. You have an impression of contact, and an impression of the second ball moving. What you don't receive is any impression of something called a causal power being transmitted from one ball to the other. So what is this causation that Locke's talking about? It can't be a relation of ideas, right? Because it can be denied without contradiction. And the billiard ball example illustrates that it's not a matter of fact. We don't receive impressions of causation from experience. According to the internal logic of Locke's own empiricism, then, talk of causation doesn't actually refer to anything. Sure, we think that the first ball makes the second ball move, but search our impressions as carefully as we like, and all we ever observe is one event followed by another. We observe succession and regularity. When we say that one event caused another event, the word seems to simply describe a mental habit that we formed of assuming that events follow one another for a reason. But we have absolutely no justification for that assumption, is Hume's point. It's not based in logic and it's not based in experience. It's just a psychological habit. David Lewis refers to the picture that emerges here as the Humean Mosaic, a universe that is nothing but, quote, a vast mosaic of local matters of particular fact, just one little thing in another. Nature, as described by Locke, was this dynamic system, right, bound together by natural necessity. Objects were vital agents straining against one another, exerting their causal powers in a sort of endless rivalry, driven by a hidden machinery of active potentiality. The universe was a living, vibrant, transformative becoming. In the Humean Mosaic, however, nature fragments into disconnected succession of self-contained moments. There are no necessary connections. There is only the accidental regularity of constant conjunction. Unmoored events scatter like tiles across an inert and lifeless background, devoid of connection, meaning, or necessity. Hume's universe is a constellation of orphaned events, touching, but never connecting. Because we can't base any of that, like connection, meaning, necessity, none of that comes from logic or experience. So to the flames. And this kills science. More specifically, it undermines our faith in induction, the intuition that events in the future will resemble events in the past. This is Hume's problem of induction, and once again, Bertrand Russell is on hand to provide a clear articulation of the situation. Our belief in science rests on an assumption that Russell calls the uniformity of nature. The belief that everything that happens is an instance of some general and exceptionalist law. When we observe the sun rising each morning and infer that it will rise again tomorrow, we're reading this assumption of law-like consistency into nature. But what justifies this assumption? It's not logic. There's no logical contradiction involved in believing that the sun won't rise tomorrow. And it's not experience either. We can't see the future to confirm that the sun will rise. And we can't point to previous cases where the future resembled the past as evidence, because that sort of reasoning is circular. It uses induction to justify our belief in induction, and thus assumes the very thing that it needs to prove. It's question-begging. So we're left without any foundation that can ground our explanations of or our predictions about the world. All we're left with is animal faith and psychological habit. The empiricist quest for certainty has devoured itself. Now, as the German philosopher Immanuel Kant tells the story, Hume's demolition of necessary connection awoke him from what he calls his long dogmatic slumber and transformed his entire approach to philosophy. A world without causation was inconceivable to Kant, in the very literal sense that it appeared impossible to actually think about the world if you removed causation from the picture. But Hume's reasoning appeared sound. Causation cannot be justified by an appeal to either relations of ideas or to matters of fact. If causation was to be saved, that salvation would have to come from something other than pure logic or pure experience. And so Kant constructed that alternative by demonstrating how a priori truths, certainties that do not depend upon experience, could be used to do what previous philosophers believed to be impossible: generate new knowledge about the world. To do this, Kant essentially turned philosophy on its head. Instead of asking, how is it that the world can produce ideas in our minds? Kant asks, how is it that our minds can construct ideas about the world? Kant called this as a Copernican Revolution. After the overthrow of geocentric astronomy by the displacement of the Earth from the center of the universe. So, big deal. Prior to Kant, philosophy had been concerned with discovering how the mind conforms to the world. Kant's revolution was to suggest that it is the world that must conform itself to the structure of the mind. What, Kant asks us, are the preconditions or the possibility of knowledge? What sort of structure does a mind have to have already in place in order for something like an experience to happen? It seemed to Kant like there needed to be some universal and objective organizing principles that were already in place for events to make sense, to be arranged into something like a comprehensible sequence that the mind could reason about. Kant's Copernican Revolution moves the outside inside. Time, space, and causation have been assumed to be aspects of the external world that we formed ideas about. Kant asks, what if time, space, and causation are actually mental categories we construct experience with? Causation, for Kant, is a condition for the very possibility of knowledge. Its proof is provided by the fact of ordered experience itself. The objective ground of universal certainty can be read right off of the structure of the mind. And it's difficult to overstate the impact of this move. The next 200 years of philosophy would see a turn away from the world of things and towards an analysis of the deep structure of the mental categories that ultimately construct human knowledge. And because our knowledge of the world is expressed through language, we can analyze the structure of thought by analyzing the structure of language. New paths opened in the wake of the Copernican Revolution. Most crucially, the polarities of subject and object were reversed. We were no longer passive subjects receiving knowledge from an external world. The Kantian subject is an active agent constructing knowledge out of the raw materials of Hume's scattered mosaic. Inductive reasoning works because the causal glue that holds the world together is actively imposed upon the world by the mind of the transcendental subject. Here at last was the key to unifying the analytic certainty of a priori reasoning with the power of a posteriori reasoning to amplify our knowledge of the world. In his analysis of causation, Kant discovers a new category, the synthetic a priori. The statement, every event has a cause, isn't true because we've observed it. Hume destroyed that possibility. Nor is it a logical tautology. Its denial isn't a contradiction. It's true because causation is a necessary precondition for the very possibility of experience. It thus contains both information about the world, it is what Kant calls synthetic, and it is knowable independently of experience. It's a priori. Synthetic a priori knowledge. That was something entirely new. Knowledge that was both certain and that added to our knowledge of the world. Philosophy now had a clear mission. It uniquely possessed the tools required to analyze the structure of knowledge, right? Philosophy becomes the queen of the sciences, studying not the world, but the mental structures that make knowledge of the world possible. But this new universal certainty comes with a price, as things often do. The inner theater of the Cartesian self has now expanded to encompass the categories of time, space, and causation. Everything comprehensible about the external world now belongs to the structure of the theater. We're no longer separated from the world by a veil of passive ideas. Our knowledge is now bounded by the limits of human comprehension itself. Kant calls the world that is structured by our categories the phenomenal world. That's what we experience. But the world outside of those categories is by definition unknowable. This is what Kant calls the noumenal world, or the world of the thing in itself, the Ding an sich. The thing in itself is not causal. That's a mental category. It's not spatial, nor is it temporal. It outruns all human categories of understanding. It is as incomprehensible as primordial chaos, and as alien as a Lovecraftian god. The world beyond the theater isn't just unknown, it's unknowable. And this conclusion isn't obviously wrong. We know that there is a vast chasm of reality that our minds simply aren't built to understand. We know that other animals can easily pick up on frequencies of light, vibrations of sound, and vivid lingering smells that our senses are blind to. The type of mind that we have does seem to both construct and limit the type of reality that we experience. And so we end this admittedly quick tour of early modern epistemology, paradoxically back at the beginning, with a world split into two realms, one known and one unknown. We hide away, safe within the comprehensible theater of the Cartesian mind, imposing causal stories upon the isolated tiles of the Humean Mosaic. But does this actually provide us with the justification for our true beliefs that we started out looking for? Have we made any progress? Is there such a thing as a universal cognitive structure that is common to all rational beings? Or do different contexts, experiences, and social positions produce fundamentally different kinds of knowledge? We'll look at these questions in the last part of the lecture, and I'll see you there.